I am so excited to have today Bobby Kilberg. I consider Bobby a very close friend to myself and my family. I met Bobby through my brother, Bobby DeLorenzi, which his passing is what brought me here to Washington, D.C. And actually, Bobby will probably never know how much she has influenced my life and influenced Texas. She probably will never know this. But because of Bobby, a lot of things happen, and maybe we'll talk a little bit about that. But normally we spend a lot of time talking about childhood. I don't want to spend a lot of time because Bobby's journey, once she got through college and everything, is so fascinating. But I do think it's important to understand a little bit about your background. And we always ask this, kind of your birth order in your family. So where were you born and raised?
My birth order is just me. I'm an only child. I was born in Manhattan, New York City, and I lived there till I was 7 years old, and then moved to a suburb called Forest Hills, where they used to play the U.S. Open before it got really fashionable, and also in Croton on the Hudson.
Excellent, excellent. And your parents have a fascinating backstory. Both of your parents are from?
Well, one of my mother was born in Russia. My father was born in Newark, New Jersey, but of Russian parents.
Right. So you're actually 100% Russian, which is fascinating. Yep. And one thing we discussed when we met previously was the fact that your mother worked outside the home. And you felt that it wasn't always precipitated by need, but a great deal by desire and wanting more for you.
Well, they were very typically, back in those old days, very typically middle class family. And I remember as an only child sitting there and looking at my friends and trying to analyze, okay, where does everybody stand in this pecking order? And there was lower economics, there was low middle, high middle, and quote, wealthy, and nobody was wealthy. And so I just we were kind of middle. But being middle, living in a very high cost city meant that if they wanted to give me opportunities, they both really did have to work. And if she had stayed home, though, I mean, that would have been terrible for her because she was very much of a person that needed the outside stimulation and the opportunities. And she had 2 years of college and had to drop out because of the Depression, and wound up running an accounting firm. And my father was the one who was the accountant and the CPA, but she was the one that it wasn't the same firm, but she, you know, she ran this other firm, and if she had had a degree, she would clearly have been the major principal, but instead she was not. She was the administrative assistant, but the place would have fallen apart without her.
It's really fascinating. One of the things we always talk about, because in those days it was very uncommon to have a mother working outside the home. We talked about how that made you feel as a child growing up with your friends and your peers.
My friends' parents were, not my friends' mothers were all staying home, and so I felt I was a little bit of an odd duck. I was very proud of my mother. I was also, even at a young age, I understood, I don't think they pounded it into me, but they enabled me to understand that working enabled me to be able to do all the kind of things I wanted to do I wouldn't have otherwise. But I, was lonely at a time, I think mostly because I was an only child more than because my mother was working. I had a nanny who was from Czechoslovakia and lived with us, and so she was kind of like a nanny grandma. But I did feel lonely. I adopted a lot of cats. When you live in apartment buildings, they didn't like dogs in those days, but I had lots of cats. And
so they kept you company? And
yeah, and I'm allergic to cats, actually, so that was
okay, all right.
Which I discovered later.
My mother, when she was little growing up in Florida, they used to have chickens, and they used to dress them up.
Oh,
baby clothes, and then the rooster would chase them.
Did you all ever read Judy Blume's Tales of a Fourth Grade Nothing? I'm reading that now to my grandkids, and there's one chapter where Peter gets a turtle as a pet, and my grandkids looked at me like, a turtle as a pet? I said, I had a turtle as a pet. That was the big thing in New York City apartment buildings. You had turtles, and they had a little fake plastic tree and a little fake plastic.
I remember those. I remember, and they were painted on the back sometimes.
Yes, and sometimes you came back, and the housekeeper would have flushed the toilet down the turtle down the toilet. So it was a big problem.
That was really big
we had
for
turtles.
a while. Yeah,
it was big.
Yeah, it was really big for. I remember everybody had turtles, and then ducks and chickens and stuff.
Not in New York City apartments, no. Not ducks and chickens.
We got those at Easter's, and then they were dead within a week.
That's right.
From manhandling from kids. So I really want to talk about the decisions you made, because that's been an important part. And we talked about this. You said you didn't think you were so strategic. I think you were brilliantly strategic in what you did. So where did you go to college? When you graduated from high school, where did you go to college, and how did you make the decision where to go?
Well, I went to Vassar College when it was still a single-sex school, and I don't think there's anybody in this room probably old enough to remember the fact that there were boys' schools and girls' schools, and the okay, there's one back there. The Ivy League, there was the Ivy League and the Seven Sisters, and if you were a boy, you went to the Ivy League, which did have Cornell and Penn, they were co-ed, but basically, all the rest were single sex. Then you had the Seven Sisters, and my parents were very broad-minded. They said I could go to any one of the Seven Sisters I wanted, and that was it. And I actually wanted to go to Cornell, and after a lot of negotiation, they said, okay, I could apply to Cornell as well. I did not get into Cornell. Cornell, in their arts and sciences school at that time, had a very strict quota on women. And they were 2/3 men and 1/3 women. And my best friend wanted to go to Vassar, and her father had gone to Cornell, and she got into Cornell because she was a legacy. And I wanted to go to Cornell, not to Vassar. And she turned Cornell down for Vassar, and the director of admissions called me and called my parents and said, would I like to have that place? And I was so angry, I said, no, I'm going to go to Vassar. Well, while guys in my class, by the way, were getting into Cornell with B+ averages, and I had an A average, and I couldn't get in, so I just said, the heck with you. So I went to Vassar. Was probably the best thing that ever happened to me.
Why do you say that?
Because I'd been at a very large high school. I mean, huge. It was 1,201 in my grade.
Wow.
And Vassar was 1,600 in the whole school. And so it gave me an opportunity to really blossom and to really have faculty pay attention to me. In the high school, what they typically did in New York City high schools was they took, if you had a class of 1,200, they would skim off about 125 of, quote, the brightest kids. And we were kind of almost in our own little school within the school. But it still was this massive high school, which I navigated through, and I was secretary of the GOP something, student government, not Republican Party. It was called the GOP. That came later, GOP Sing, which was a big thing. And so I had a place, but it was not the same as being in something that was almost to me a cocoon, which was what Vassar was.
What do you think was driving you to kind of stand out that way and excel? I mean, were you always just like this outspoken or this confident in yourself? Was confidence a natural part of your personality? Because when I think of you, I think of confidence. You just exude it.
Well, I think, as I'm sure is true of everybody in this room, that my parents really told me I could do anything I wanted to do. And when you have a child where one half of the parents is an immigrant, as my mom was, there is this really drive that they instill in you, and to them, education, and this is very much, part of Jewish American culture as well. Education was extraordinarily important, and standing up for yourself was extraordinarily important. So I think it just kind of came naturally. But I then went to Columbia. I was going to become a PhD and be a teacher, and so I went to Columbia in political science and lasted 1 year. I was very, very bored. I found again that in the Vassar education, I had literally read everything that they had assigned in the first year of the graduate program. I said, this kind of sucks. And I really wasn't into it, and so I wound up going to law school at Yale.
We talked about your decision to go to law school. Let's talk about how you made that decision. So we had Vassar, and then you moved to Yale. But Yale was still, at the time, when you were prior to moving there, was still an all-male school.
Correct, except for the graduate program. We had graduate programs. There were 9 women in my class of 144 total. There were 9 women in the law school. That wasn't very, and only 7 of us graduated. That wasn't a lot.